Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am talking, first, I'm Chip Brown of horns247.com for crying out loud. If you're new to the show, welcome. And I am previewing Texas TCU with the voice of the TCU Horned Frogs, the one and only Brian Estridge. 24 years you've been the voice of the Horned Frogs. Brian, you do a great job, by the way.
Damn, am I that old? 24 years, Chip?
Oh, my God. I've been covering
Has it been
Texas
that
for
long?
30 years.
30 years. I mean, what are we doing?
What are we
Gosh, where
doing?
does time go, man?
I mean, I like to think we're lucky that we get to
No question.
make our lives college football, or our
Yes.
professional lives, shall we say.
Yes.
And Brian, this TCU team is fascinating. We have a lot to talk about because the Horned Frogs they're in college football playoff contention. And they were 5-7 last year under Gary Patterson. Now Gary Patterson is a special assistant at Texas, and Sonny Dykes has turned TCU from 5-7 into a college football playoff contender. How on earth has he done it?
I think it's a whole mixture of things, Chip. I'll be honest with you. I think it started in the offseason. He went out and he hired Kaz Kazadi as his strength coach. And Kaz is he's really developed these guys both physically but also mentally. He spends a ton of time on that, and I think that in itself has given this program the confidence that they needed. They sort of built these guys up. I think they felt when they came in that these guys were broken down, and that they needed a shot of confidence, and so that they thought that they could contend. And so that was the first thing that happened, and that happened in the offseason. I think after that, too, they put in two systems, one on offense and one on defense, that these players really love, that allow them to kind of play free and easy, but also has a purpose to it. And as Sonny said a couple of weeks ago, they realized that there was a method to the madness, if you will. And so these guys think they're walking into a game with the best stuff. And you know that, Chip, whether you're a pitcher or you're, an offensive lineman, if you think you've got the best stuff, that goes a long way to being successful. So I think those two things, sort of played the biggest roles in it. I think obviously having some early success. I think having a leader like Max Duggan at quarterback. I think having some talent that was already here, but then augmented with some really strategic portal decisions by Sonny Dykes and his staff. I think all of those things in the mix. I've told people this. I'm sure Sonny's made a mistake. I don't know what it is yet. I'll be honest with you. I haven't seen it. So I think it's just been a lot of really good decisions that have gone a long way.
Well, when you say strategic portal decisions,
yeah,
what are you referring to?
Alon Ali at center from SMU. He brought 40 starts from SMU. He was a guy that Sonny knew quite well. I think that was, to me, maybe the biggest impact that we've seen here. I think allowing some guys to leave was another strategic decision on his part that's obviously worked out correctly. So I think that was it. I think also, there were some guys that wanted to come here that they vetted pretty heavily and said no to. Because I think they felt like they had, and I'm just going to be candid with you, they were quarterbacks, and because I think they felt like they had 2-3 guys that could play here, and they didn't want to really upset the apple cart too much. And so I think all those decisions really have paved the way for what has become as tight a group as I've seen at TCU. I'll be honest with you. These guys, in years past, it had been kind of offense versus defense. And there was always somewhat of a divide here. That's not the case. I mean, it is, and maybe that's just natural, with a head coach who's kind of and he's not afraid to say this, more of a CEO head coach. Maybe that's just natural. Mac probably had that when he was, in his later years. These guys all get along, and I think that's gone a long way to the success as well, Chip.
Well, you look at this TCU team, and they're sort of the antithesis of Texas. Texas gets off to these big leads and then they play, you know, to protect the lead or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and they end up giving up the lead. TCU's the opposite. They are trailing in the second half of games, and they find a way to win. How many second half? I mean, I've
4.
counted at least 4.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's
Second
4.
half where
And
they're
you know what's
behind and they find a way to win.
And what's weird is, Chip, that the way they've done it, and I was talking to Sonny about this just this past week, in that Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator, is a young buck. He's Lincoln's brother, his younger brother, and I tell you, he's really good. I didn't know anything about him coming in other than he had been at my alma mater. I graduated from App State, and he had done a good job there, but he was just a running back coach. And when I was talking to people there about him, they all thought he was super bright. And he kind of went there to go with Eli Drinkwitz to learn that Gus Malzahn run system. And so he's a super bright guy. But what Coach Dykes was telling me last week was he's really patient. He said he's more patient than I am. And he said, I'm supposed to be the patient one as the experienced guy. But, there are times in games, especially, when we get down and this is Sonny talking, where I'm like, hey, we need to throw some verts. Let's go. We got to get a big play. And Garrett has said, no, we got Kendre Miller. We're going to keep running the football, and and they never ventured away from the game plan in all of those games. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, where these guys have this super confidence in their stuff because the game plan that has put in place has worked 9 straight weeks. It took a little while in some of those games to kick in, but it's worked and they haven't ventured from it. And so I think, I think Garrett Riley has really played a key role in that.
Okay. So Lincoln Riley,
mm-hmm.
Garrett's older brother, of course, did a power run version of the air raid based off of counter Trey. So how much of that is Garrett running?
Well, you're going to see some GT stuff, that's for sure, where they pull the guard and tackle, follow up behind him with Kendre Miller. There's a lot of that in there. And so, and that's kind of the new, the Gus Malzahn way of doing it, that everybody's, well, not everybody, but a lot of people have found it in vogue now. I was with Justin Fuente today. You remember him, the head coach at Virginia Tech, and what a terrific guy. We were watching the game from yesterday, and he was pointing that out. That look at there's Malzahn's. That's a Malzahn play right there, and he's giving what the play was. And so I think you'll see some of that influence. And Kendre Miller, the running back from Mount Enterprise, has been really good. He's now got 10 100-yard rushing games in his career, back to back to back to back. Here he is now. He's got a touchdown in every game this season. Goes over $150 against Texas Tech. He's a guy that has a burst about him, but he doesn't go down on first contact. That's the thing, man. Chip, he can spin out of plays. He can power through plays. He's got great balance. Puts his hand down. Stays low at times. There's something about him that he's got a. He's got a will and a determination to get to the stick or to get to the goal line, whatever it is. And so I think that's been good. But they've also benefited from a really good offensive line and bringing in A.J. Ricker, who is a tactician and offensive line coach, I think has gone a long way to helping this group as well. They've had the talent. They just haven't necessarily had the detail work that they've gone through now. And I think that's helped this offense.
All right, let's stay with the offense. And Max Duggan is the Big 12 Player of the Year. I mean, what a story. Texas fans know Max Duggan because he beat them twice in a row. And what step has he taken, Brian? Because he just looks in full command out there.
Yeah, I tell you, there's a couple of steps, and you're right. I mean, Chip, it's hard not to like him, even if you're not a fan of TCU. I mean, what he's been through, what he's overcome. The story during COVID, they ran a test, found an issue with his heart. There was some question as to whether or not he'd play again. He's the son of a coach. He had the job, then he lost the job, then he got the job back. He's got a wonderful family. My response to people who ask me about Max Duggan all the time when they say, "Now, really, what kind of guy is he?" I'd say, "Well, I'd let him babysit." Is that enough answer right there? Because
Yeah.
he's the kind of guy you'd let babysit your kiddos. But I tell you what, he's as far as his game is concerned, I think there's a couple of things, Chip, that he's done. One is he's getting rid of the ball a lot quicker. He's not in search of the perfect play all the time, and I think that had been the case before. And maybe some of that was being the son of a coach, that he would hold on to it a little longer than he needed to. He's been effective running the football, obviously, throughout his career, but he's been super effective this year because he's been able to pick and choose when he runs. That's not always his first reaction, which it had been in years past. Tuck it under and go. No, let's scramble and throw it. Still, is something that he's done. He's throwing guys open. He's got more touch on his ball than he's had in years past. And the other thing is, I think he's alluded to this, that he's not afraid of getting his butt chewed out after every play now, and these coaches kind of coach with, okay, that one didn't work. All of our pencils have an eraser. We'll try another play. It's not always Max's fault. And so I think all those things, coupled with the fact he's got some great wide receivers who are super talented. He's got a running back in Kendre Miller, an offensive line that we've talked about. He's got a tight end that you guys know quite well, in Wiley.
Jared
And so
Wiley.
yeah, exactly. So I think all those things added to the make. And I tell you, there's another thing, Chip. And you've been through things like this probably in your life. When you have something taken away, and he had lost that starting job, at Colorado, I think that ate at him. And I think when he got it back, and unfortunately it was due to injury to Chandler Morris. It was nothing Chandler did. And who knows? I think the Frogs would still just be just as good with Chandler out there. But Max wasn't going to give it up. He'd lost it once, and I just think there is something about him that says, I'm not giving this starting job up again. And I think that's what's been driving him as well.
Is Chandler Morris, is he healthy?
I think I don't know that he's 100%. In fact, I asked Sonny about this a couple of weeks ago, and he said, he could play and would play. He said,
like if Max got dinged,
he'd be fine. Yeah, he'd be fine to
coming.
go out there. Oh, yeah, he got a couple of snaps. I mean, they were nothing, clean up at the end against Texas Tech. I think, the grind of an 80-play game a couple of weeks ago it would have concerned them. I don't know about now, but I think there was some, you needed some time to heal from that knee. But I think he's pretty close now.
Quentin Johnston. And it drives me crazy because the TV announcers always call him Quentin Johnson. And it's like, are you reading your roster?
Right. Was that the same announcers on Saturday that called it Amon Carter Stadium?
Oh, my gosh. It was like, seriously.
Yeah.
Quentin Johnston, this guy is phenomenal. A, how is his health? And B, just talk about what makes him special.
Yeah, let's talk about his health first. Obviously, he injured it 2 weeks ago at West Virginia, hurt his ankle, came back in that game, but wasn't really at 100%, and you could tell, and went back out. And then this one, he took a day off of practice last week, I think it was, and then started the game Saturday against Texas Tech, but it just didn't feel right. And so I think it was a smart move on the coach's part to pull him out and just say, you know what, we're going to give this thing another week, and get you ready for Texas. It was funny, Chip, during every timeout, I would look down, and he had his helmet on, and he was running sprints in front of Malcolm Kelly, the wide receiver coach, as if to say, see, I can go. But they never put him back in, and I think that was probably a wise decision. They think he'll be full go this week against Texas. And there's a couple of things that separate him. Obviously, his size and his strength. He's a 6'5" wide receiver that can high point the football, and he's got great hands and all those things. Yeah, but to me, the thing about him is he's tougher than you think. Because you look at him and you go, oh, there's kind of a thin, tall guy. He's a vertical guy, but no, man, he'll catch it across the middle. Look at his yards after catch number. I mean, here's what stood out to me earlier in the year. He had the game against, was it Kansas? I think it was, where he had 14 catches.
Right.
He broke 10 tackles on those 14 catches. that's that wide receivers don't do that. and he does. And so I think there's a toughness about him that people may not know or give him credit for. I tell you the other thing I love about him against Oklahoma, he wasn't, they had done a nice job trying to take him out of the game plan. And late in that game, he had come by the bench, and Malcolm Johnson, the wide receiver coach, he's a terrific coach. He says to him, he said, listen, I know you haven't got a lot of touches. They've been taking you away. Don't worry about that. You're doing all the right things. You had a couple of pass interference calls that you were a part of, which was really good, drawing pass interferences. You've been running great routes. You're blocking great. Don't worry. Hey, NFL scouts are going to see that. And Quentin stopped him, kind of held his hand up and said, Coach, we're winning. And I thought that said a lot about him, that it's just not about his touches. It's about winning football games. And that's what you get when you get Quentin.
That's awesome. All right, let's take a quick break with Brian Estridge, the voice of the TCU Horned Frogs. It's Texas and TCU Saturday in Austin. Game day, college game day is coming back to Austin. Game day was just in Fort Worth. I mean, it is a love affair right now going on with the TCU Horned Frogs. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we'll roll on with Brian. And Brian, I mean, defensively, TCU, I mean, Gary Patterson, he's got a statue there on campus. He's the defensive minded guy. And we'll get to Gary and what, his role is and all this coming up Saturday. But talk about the defense and what stands out about the Horned Frogs.
I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a freedom to this defense that has been rejuvenating for some of these players. And when you hear them talk about it, they talk in those terms. And that, again, they're getting to call in a little bit quicker. They're able to react to things. Not, it's a little more reactionary, using their athleticism. I think it may be a better way to put it. It's not as rigid as maybe defenses they played in the past. They love the scheme itself. This 3-3-5. I think it suits the roster at TCU. Although the roster may be a little bit light at linebacker, to be honest with you, because of the prior scheme. But I think from a defensive line standpoint, running that 3-3-5 stack's a little easier at TCU. It also highlights these safeties and corners who can be very physical and have proven that. So I think they really like it. It hasn't been perfect. I'll tell you that, Chip. It hasn't been perfect, and there are some times where teams have taken advantage. I thought teams in first halves this year have had really good game plans against it. They've come out with new stuff that TCU hasn't necessarily think. I thought Texas Tech moved the ball in the first half, especially against TCU, and in an impressive way. So it hasn't been perfect. It's still kind of a work in progress. I mean, let's face it. The 4-2-5 of Gary Patterson's is kind of in the DNA at TCU. It had been around here for 2+ decades. And so you got to kind of work that out. You got to kind of flush it out of your system. And I don't think that happens overnight. This is not a colonoscopy preparation kit. I mean, you got to work through it a little bit.
Right.
And so I think there's some of that's still that this team is still fighting through.
Yeah. We'll talk about the players who make it go. The war daddies on that defense. Who are they?
Well, one of them you won't see in the first half, and that's D. Winters, the linebacker, who got the targeting call in the game against Texas Tech. So you won't see him in the first half, and that's a shame because he's playing really good football. Yeah, the linebackers, we kind of joke it's a law firm, Hodges and Winter. They're pretty good. They've had a lot of success, and Johnny Hodges is a kid who transferred from the Naval Academy, who had given SMU fits when Sonny was there. There's a strategic move made by Sonny Dykes. He needed a linebacker. Okay, who gave us the most trouble in the American Conference? Well, it was Johnny Hodges at Navy. He had 14 tackles against him, I think it was. So he's now at TCU. I think those guys have been really good. Obviously, the corners. are special. You know about Trey Tomlinson. He's been good. Josh Newton has really worked himself into probably being an NFL corner now at TCU. You get Millard Bradford. You may remember that name as Nook Bradford, who played last year, but now going by Millard or Millard maybe.
Well,
Who?
and Josh Newton, they got from ULM.
Yes, exactly.
And Terry Bowden was like, that was my guy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, so they've been, like I said, they've been real strategic in it. And then they got Big Dom Williams at nose tackle, who's a true freshman. I mean, a true freshman. He turned 18 after the Colorado game, Chip. And here's a guy. I asked Sonny last week if he's hit that freshman wall. How many times do we see that, especially with linemen? Can they withstand it? And he said, shockingly, he has not. And so he's been a real asset for him. And so I think you got a couple of guys on defense that can play. And Joe Gillespie's the defensive coordinator. He came from Tulsa. And, he's a fun guy to be around, high energy guy. And I think these guys really like playing for him.
Yeah, that's been an interesting group to watch because quarterbacks keep getting hurt against TCU.
Yeah, and I don't, and there was one school that was trying to stir something up on that. If you go back and you look at them, it's just been freak things. It's not anything intentional here. Right. It has just been, unfortunate, to be quite honest with you. And but there, you have seen that, throughout the Big 12 games that TCU has gotten to the quarterback or things have happened to them, and it's been unfortunate for them. It's been obviously lucky for TCU.
Yeah, I mean, it's listen, they're playing hard, they're playing physical.
Yeah.
All right, so Gary Patterson, there he is, the special assistant at Texas. First of all, can you see his influence, based on your experience with Gary, and what influence do you think he'll have in this game?
Knowing Coach Patterson, I'm sure he's staying up late and he's grinding on the Frogs. You know that. I mean, I'm sure he is. I'm anxious to see because I wonder what kind of influence does he get in the game plan. You would think a lot, but
he's done he's like the king of the opponent scout.
Yeah, that's what they're using him for. Yeah, and it almost seems unfair, doesn't it? That here you are, and like all of us, we've been talking about Gary Patterson, but we don't really talk about Pete. No one knows who he is half the time, right?
I know.
And so if this defense
doesn't let him talk, so
I know.
we never hear from the guy.
But if this defense does well, everyone's going to say, "Oh, it's Gary Patterson's influence," and if they don't, they're going to say, "Oh, they didn't let Gary have enough influence in it."
Right.
It's super unfair to Pete, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's like, man, that's a really tough situation that
I agree
that Chris Del Conte drew up there. And so it's like, man, why would you do that to a guy? But anyway,
put your guy in a pickle.
Yeah, no joke. So I don't know. I think obviously I think Gary's going to grind on this one a lot. I mean, he's very super competitive. It looks like they're playing with a real attitude on defense at times at Texas, and I think that's something that that Gary's defenses over the years, have brought. Those guys have been willing to give up their bodies defensively at times, and I think Texas has done that, and so I'm sure we'll see some Gary Patterson influence. And, hey, he's gone up against the air raid for many years. He's done it obviously against Lincoln and others. And so, he's seen what TCU is going to do. He's played against Sonny. Sonny had success against him, obviously, at SMU for a couple of times. But, he knows what Sonny Dykes likes to do. So that's going to be fun to watch, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the fact that Sonny was a special assistant to Gary, an analyst or whatever, right?
It's a small world, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, what special teams?
Yeah.
TCU special teams. How would you rate the special teams? Who are strengths and weaknesses?
It's funny when you look at some of these analytic groups. I was talking about this with somebody last week. They don't rate TCU special teams very high. And some of it is because there's not a body of work. Up until the Tech game, the Frogs had 0 punt returns against them. No team had returned a punt I know that was through 8 games, and because Jordy Sandy, the punter, this is kind of strange. We're gonna get into punting talk here. Punts the ball opposite field more than any punter in the country. So if he's on the right hash, he's punting it left more than anyone does away from the returner. So just kind of reduces the number of return yards. He's also an Australian, so he's got the rugby punt and tends to punt away from returners. So, he's been pretty effective. His average doesn't show that he's a booming 48-yard guy every time, but you look at his effectiveness, it's been pretty good. They've asked him to punt in some short field situations. It obviously hurts your overall average, but he's been effective in those. So that's been good. The coverage teams have been solid. I just looked at this note today. Chip, I think it's 336 kicks without a kickoff return for a score against TCU. So for years, that's been kind of a trademark here. And then you got Darius Davis, the punt returner, who now has 5 punt returns for touchdowns on his career. He just passed the Cowboy, Kevontae Turpin, as the all-time punt return leader at TCU. So he's a weapon that can get it done in both kick and punt return if you kick it to him. That has been, that's proven out over the last several years. And Griffin Cale has been really good as a kicker. Again, another guy who's playing with so much more confidence now than in years past. And they've done a great job of boosting that with him. Mark Tomerdal's the special teams coach here. And they call him the professor. He spends so much time on them. And just to have a guy dedicated to special teams, TCU had never had that before. And so I think that's made a big difference for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this TCU team, you look at the stats, you look at the numbers, and they don't do anything exceptional, but they do everything well. Like, Iowa State's got the number 1 defense and the number 1, they're the Sudoku puzzle on
Right.
defense, and offensively it was Oklahoma State, although the wheels have come off. But TCU, I mean, offensively has been a monster. And that's, I mean, how do you see this game Saturday playing out between Texas and TCU?
It's interesting because the way you started this conversation, I hadn't really thought of that. The fact that Texas has started fast in every game and they've kind of owned first halves, and TCU's kind of owned second halves. And both of them know that. And both of them are thinking, okay, we've got to be better at the other. So I wonder if this game flips. No, yeah, TCU's good the first and Texas is good in the second. Here's what I know. It's going to be physical. It is going to be a physical game. There's so much on the line for both programs, with what the future holds as far as the college football playoff, the Big 12 championship is concerned. I think that coupled with, and I haven't made a big deal about it. I know TCU and Sonny Dykes aren't talking about it. I think the fact that Gary Patterson's on the other side, I think that will matter. I think it will for some of these players. And so I get the sense that this is just going to be a physical game on Saturday night. I really do. That has not always been the case when TCU and Texas have played, but for some reason, I just feel like this one's going to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I wasn't sure what to make of TCU.
Yeah.
Going into this year, because coming off of 5-7, you're not sure. And look at what Sonny's done. He's taken 5-7 and put him in playoff contention. Steve Sarkisian inherited a 7-3 team, went 5-7 in year 1, and is now trying to get that arrow pointed up. And that win at K-State certainly helped, because my God, they'd lost 5 straight true road games.
Right. Do you guys get a chance to talk to Patterson? Do they let him talk?
No.
Because I'd be anxious
on lockdown. And I talk to Gary all the time prior to him coming here.
Right. Because I just wonder what I would be curious as to, if what he's saying about this week. If he's walking through the locker room talking about this one,
right.
Is Sark saying, hey, let's go win this one for Coach P? Is there some of
Right.
that going on?
Right. Well,
Because
that will
it could
certainly
very
be
well be the
asked
case.
of Sark on Monday.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll see what Sark says. Sark is way more Saban than he is Pete Carroll. So we don't talk, we talk to the offensive and defensive coordinators before the season, and then we don't talk to them again. And then
Yeah.
the kids are out there having to answer the questions for
Yeah. It's
what
not fair.
it's.
Yeah,
I don't.
that's what's been refreshing about Sonny, to be honest with you, is
Yeah,
Coach Dykes is
he is more
is an
Pete
open
Carroll.
book. Yeah, he promotes his coaches. He wants them to talk. He wants them to be in those
Right.
situations because he even talks about, hey, Malcolm Kelly's going to be an offensive coordinator one day, and so and so is going to be a head coach, and we got to get him that's the way he thinks. He's all about promoting these coaches and helping them, and I think it's good for them to be able to meet with the media, and we're not gonna bite them. I mean, come on,
Right.
we love the information that they share, and we learn from them. And
Right.
so I think there's something to be said for that. And so, it was open practices in the spring, and that was just that was an amazing sight, Chip. I mean, it was a party at practice, to be honest with you. But they got a lot done. I mean, obviously it worked. They're 9-0.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I love that. I mean, I was talking to some of the guys about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Sonny's opened up practice." I'm like,
Yeah,
"Oh my gosh, that
I
that
know.
is Pete Carroll. That's
Yeah, it's
and
kind of fun.
Mac was that way,
Yeah,
and he promoted his assistants, and he wanted them to talk because he wanted them to become head coaches, and
yes,
they have to learn how to handle that part of the job.
yeah.
So
There's this. I think there's a conception by a perception, I should say, by some coaches that, um, as the head coach, you're in it alone, but you're not. And if you think that, that's kind of that's almost that's almost damning of your assistants when you say that, because they're busting their butt for you, and so
right,
what do they get in return for that?
right, right, yeah. That whole Bill Parcells and Nick Saban notion of they need to be the voice of the team. Okay, well,
Yeah,
I mean, if you say so,
right,
but
exactly. To each his own, I guess.
yeah, and that's going to be interesting, I think, because Steve Sarkisian, he's a big part of the reason that they get off to fast starts. He's obviously got a really good game plan. He's got a good script of plays. They put points on the board in the first half, and then the last two games they've been outscored 34-6 in
Yeah,
the second half. So the adjustments, the creativity, something's missing because you got Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy, and you're scoring 3 points
right,
in the second half.
right.
Um, so this is, I think it's gonna be a fascinating game, and um, Texas, uh, they've been up and down. They played up and down to the competition, and they'll play up this week
Yeah.
because TCU's in the college football playoff, and these other layers maybe, depending on how much Sark wants to let the Gary Patterson storyline
Hmm.
be a part of it, will be interesting. What else, Brian, do you think is important for fans to consider as we look forward to this game?
I think you're going to see a team that's unified. I think you'll see a team that plays hard, that doesn't flinch. I think those are a couple of things that you'll notice about this group. I don't think a big stage will bother them at all. I think that I think Jared Wiley has prepared those who haven't been to Texas on what they're going to see and what to expect out of that team. So I think all of that sort of fits into the narrative into this game, and I think you're going to see a confident bunch that rolls into Austin, and they'll be anticipating rolling out of there with a victory.
What's been the closest call, Brian?
Let's think about that, because you know this Texas Tech game was probably closer than maybe the score, the score
Right.
looked. Maybe,
TCU
I
trailed in
think,
the third quarter. They
yeah, I
trailed in
think
the
that
third
was.
quarter of
I think,
Kansas,
yeah.
Oklahoma
I mean,
State.
Oklahoma State early on. That was, that was one where you thought to yourself. I mean, you get down early, you're like, ooh, I don't know, this might
Down
not be good.
24-7.
Yeah, West Virginia early in that game had a decent game
K-State,
plan. Yeah,
28-10.
K-State. K-State was another one, there've been several of them. I mean, where do you start? SMU early in that game. I mean, so I think all of those things kind of, but I think that's what's sort of sharpened this team's armor. I think having to deal with that has made them better. And so, you thought you were going to get off to a quick start against Texas Tech. You had the punt return after the opening series by Tech. They go 3 and out, they punt, and Darius Davis takes it 82 to the house. And you thought, okay, there's a quick start, but it didn't necessarily play out that way. I mean, it was a back and forth game until that fourth quarter. So, they've all been tight games, and I think that's good.
Yeah,
that's what the Big 12 is about.
I'm excited. This is the great surprise of the college football season, certainly in the Big 12 and nationally, has been TCU and Sonny. I went to SMU. I've known Sonny since he was the recruiting coordinator at Tech under Mike Leach, and he told me the great story about having Crabtree.
Yes.
On a recruiting visit, Crabtree was thinking about playing basketball, and he takes him to go see Bob Knight, and it's a recruiting weekend. Sonny's phone's blowing up, and Bob Knight's like, "Hey, shut that thing off." And Sonny's like, "Sorry, coach," and he steps outside, and he comes back in and they're talking to Crabtree, and then Sonny's phone goes off again, and Knight's like, I thought I told you to turn that thing off. And by the fourth time, Crabtree's like, "Nah, we're good. We're done.
Yeah,
I'm not playing basketball here."
You'd seen enough, man. You'd seen enough. Hey, I got a great question. You're the one guy in the league that could get an answer on this. If TCU runs the table and is undefeated, if you're the commissioner, do you cancel the championship game?
Oh, I mean, that'd be something.
I mean,
I don't know that you can contractually.
I don't know.
I mean, the schools want their money,
right? But you see what you see what I'm getting.
Oh
at.
yeah.
Because if you did, you'd probably have a team locked into the playoff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I doubt it, but that would be something.
Yeah,
that'd be something.
What if one of the teams?
That was always the big fear. That's why Stoops and Mack didn't want
the
that championship game to be the top two teams, because if you beat them once, it's hard to beat them a second time, and it could cost you a spot in the playoffs. So
someone brought that up to me today, and I went, "Wow, that's a good question." What do you do if you're commissioner?
Yeah. Well, Brian, great stuff, man. I'm excited for this one, and really, really appreciate the time.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you this weekend, man.
All right. For Brian Estridge, the voice of the TCU Horned Frogs, I am Chip Brown. Until next time, here on the Flagship Podcast, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Until then, stay safe and keep the faith.